1994, September 14th. Thousands of people from Zaire to Johannesburg saw a flaming object flying north to south in the skies above southern Africa. And it was ground tracked over the Pyrenees across North Africa towards Johannesburg, flashing rapidly and very brightly. It was found as being NORAD item 23219 and was the upper SL-16RB stage of a Kosmos Russian rocket with a spy satellite, designation 2290, launched August 26, 1994, and it lasted until April 4th, 1995, when it fell into the atmosphere and delivered its spy tracking film. It actually used film, apparently. Now, that was on the 14th of September, 1994. People all over the freaking continent, just about, saw this. It was technically visible from some parts of England and that sort of thing. And over, anywhere. You just had to see it at the right time. By the 16th, Ruwa Zimbabwe, 62 out of 250 school kids at the Ariel School that were aged 6 to 12 said they saw something from 10 a.m. in the morning to 10:15 a.m. approximately during early recess at a specific location. And virtually every website that tells you about this just doesn't give you the GPS coordinates, so they're down below in the description. Wonder why. 3 days after this, on the 19th, they were BBC film interviewed by someone who would have obviously had access to the previous story done in the Daily Telegraph from the 14th, who later said, the standard typical, scientist baffled style statement. And some of the kids said it was UFOs and or creatures that were teleporting. Some of them might have brought up at the time a local boogeyman style story to describe it, which is just fine. Just say, yeah, I saw something that looked like Bigfoot, or in this case, something that looked like a djinn or something else. There's a specific name for it, but it's not relevant. They saw something that would appear and seemingly disappear at 10 a.m. in the morning. And these are school kids from age from 6 to 12. Okay. And again, that was 3 days after the fact, and after upwards of anywhere from at least 1 day to several days to many days of people knowing about, almost a week here, people in the area knowing about it because they went outside and saw this crap fly from north to south over their continent. And again, we have a BBC person saying, I wasn't able to get confirmation or any kind of other explanation from any source specifically. How were you avoiding it? And, well, these people are in an area where nobody could get the data. They observed it directly above their heads. A statement of no precedent happened before this that would cause a person to be primed to believe in UFOs, even though literally everybody was doing UFO stories, including local, rumor mongering, along with local newspaper and radio were communicating it because they didn't have information for a little while, and then they got the information, reported what it was, because a rumor is instantly created and will gratify you. Versus, let's check NORAD and let's check if the Russians are admitting they put up a spy satellite. Anyway, all this stuff burned up over them 2 days earlier, right? It wasn't just, keep going around the Earth. It's not like it could be in an extremely weird orbit where more pieces might have fell in over the area. Anyway, after the BBC interviewer or BBC, slapped that on him to give him credibility, guy who said something that I don't find credible. But that's only if this is being reported correctly. And asserted over and over again for years afterwards by this person, even though that's poppycock. Anyway, 4 days after the incident, on the 20th, approximately, another person interviewed them in small groups instead of individually, and others were allowed to listen in so they could compare notes and stories. And again, this is 4 days afterwards. Now, much later, and vaguely X number of months later, and the numbers don't match up, supposedly either October or November, and then it settled on being in November, a psychology professor, but known environmentalist, interviewed them, prompting them to suggest telepathic communications, and magically they became interested in repeating, in some cases, poorly pronounced buzzwords used by environmentalists about how they were receiving telepathic messages and things were moving and, whatever. These are things they hadn't brought up before, obviously. He was reprimanded earlier for telling people who believed they'd been abducted by aliens that it absolutely has to be real. And not that, it's very likely, in fact, the majority of cases where someone claims they've been abducted, they weren't. Because there's solid evidence they simply weren't. And barring absolute negative proof, people are allowed to believe whatever they want to, but it's dangerous to do so in a psychiatric situation if you're a psychology professor or a psychiatrist, or just giving advice. Remember, I am not your hacker. I am a hacker, but I'm not giving you hacking advice. However, Epstein did kill himself. So anyway, here we go. He had virtually abandoned all of his normal work as a psychology professor or whatever, and attempted to prove alien visitation occurred, and seemed pretty adamant about it, and also had a book out that he was selling. But yeah, they got peaceful and pleasant messages from the aliens or whatever. Or maybe you walked up to a kid and said, "You're very special. You've been selected. I need you to communicate this message if you're asked, because we need to save the planet, and you'll feel very bad if you don't fix things." Don't take advantage of kids that are capable of wanting to repair a butterfly wing. Don't take advantage of that for your projects. So we got one activist who's an environmentalist and a true believer that should not have been allowed near it. Yes, skeptics, yes, but absolute disprovers, no. And absolute believers, no. You have to have people that are truly neutral, which means you can't find out even after the fact that they ever were a biased person. But anyway, this was days later. But the bias happened when someone caused interviews to mix and cummel. And before that, a person, again, saying, "I'm with the BBC, I have merit, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to just deliberately ignore the fact that I'm very much aware that a satellite launching vehicle burned up over the area X number of days later or earlier, and a bunch of people saw it, and they were actually talking about it. And this is not a sterilized environment where nobody was communicating about anything like that. And yes, in the area, people were talking up that it was aliens. Okay, now we're done. Add that to the fact we have superstition and that sort of thing. And when is superstition tolerable? Here we go. Again, rumor mongering is instant. You can just create a story. People tell stories because it helps them remember what happened. It doesn't matter that a person tells a story, well, a kangaroo and a wallaby and a gerbil were flapping their wings, which they don't have, and I saw blah, 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 or whatever. A very good example. I'm going to tell you about a story of me seeing what I thought was a two-legged deer with front legs sticking out of its chest, but the rear was gone. That's a very good description, as best as I could do it, of a kangaroo. I call it the kangaroo thing, otherwise known as three blind mice can't figure out that it's an elephant, which is all of us. We create these narratives because in our limited experience, we don't know how things really are unless we've experienced them, and then we have them explained to us. Pretty simple. Do you actually know what a four-dimensional space would look like if you were to try to walk through it? Now, I want to explain this to you. No, you don't. Because we can't perceive that. Well, no, that's bullshit. From our limited perspective, having 3D vision, we would have a very confusing set of images overlaying each other. And yes, you can get one of those AR, augmented reality. Don't do the VR one. Do the augmented reality one. And have a four-dimensional object come through your three-dimensional world. That's more understandable. And you can actually do this in a mathematically correct way and see a hypercube rotate when you try to rotate it, which means you'll get an intrinsic, literal, visceral understanding of something. So until you have that hands-on experience with something, you don't know what it is. The first time I touched softened lead wire, I compared to the first time I touched an ultralight material of an aluminum compound that happened to be hollow, where it was unreal how lightweight it is and tough and strong. It was an aircraft-grade piece of metal that I got a hold of. I did scrap work with my dad at one point. And we found aircraft parts, the kind of things where you'd look at it and say, this has got to be alien technology. No, it's a hollow aluminum part, and yeah, it might just as well be. And over here was the lead wire, which was so unbelievably dense, but malleable. And I compared it to the heaviest hunk of clay I've ever touched. And he immediately made me wash my hands and told me exactly how toxic that was, and told me this was aluminum, and said, good luck breaking it, and I couldn't break it, so we had to cut it, and that almost destroyed the saw, because yes, you can harden aluminum, because what happens if you oxidize aluminum enough? It turns into fucking rubies. So, transparent aluminum joke from Star Trek. So, with that experience, I was able to really get into, for way too long, being able to weigh and measure not the weight, but figure out the density of things. That allowed me to take a handful of coins and shake them and figure out which one was the fake. Or which one was the good silver ones, because that's what I was looking for. I was handed the jewelry and everything, and I could figure out whether it was good or not without having to whip out some complicated equipment. Because I fine-tuned my ability to detect this. Neat. That also means that I'm a bitch when it comes to jewelry and metals and stuff for a long time, too. I was a snob about it, and also I was more than a little full of myself, if you can't figure out from me saying this. I really was. But the point is, and yes, I would be wrong every once in a while. Duh. So we have some kids who are experiencing this, and they're using what they have in their head to work with. Compare it to something you've seen. What have they seen? Now, these are upper middle class kids at a place where you wouldn't think it would happen. They all drew pictures of UFO. Again, they're not an insulated or sterilized environment. They were aware of what UFOs were supposed to look like. This is the 90s, not the 40s. So what could it have been? Okay, again, we've got a bias from a person who created it, probably by accident, by interviewing them in groups, because it's hard to maintain a bunch of kids and control them. There's a BBC person who simply seemed to turn the other way about facts contradictory to it. Maybe he was being honest journalistically and trying not to taint his own interviews. And then we have a psychology professor or psychologist or whatever who has a bunch of stuff going against them being useful as a source, who wanted them to deliver an environmentalist message, which is okay, but not in this case. It wasn't. And this individual had an overwhelming motivation to try to prove alien visitation was real. And these are the people who screw over any possibility of us actually having anything not questioned. I mean, an alien aircraft can land and we'll all be like, it's got to be a drone. Our world is very tainted by that. But let's move on. What could it have been? In the area, and this is from many years before and after, there was a touring puppet show with oversized, not proportional-looking human shapes being used to teach health subjects. Yes, it has a specific wording to it, but it's not relevant. And it might have been going through the area and they might have remembered it. And it was out of proportion human shapes, which is what the kids drew, basically. Next, a kid who was there later on claimed to have done it by doing this. I pointed at a rock shining in the sun and told the other kids it was a spaceship and there were aliens around it. And then they started seeing it and turned into a whole freaking hysterical thing. Also, there were dust devils that day. There's lots of things going on that if you were bored outside and all the teachers are inside for a get-together and talk and kick out the kids' things and then go out and play on an early recess, minds will run wild. Next, again, we have bias from at least one source heavily, other one very minor, and another person seeming to turn the other way. Bad or just kind of poor journalism all the way to outright trying to screw it up. Is this the most convincing case? No, it's not. Sorry, it just doesn't. But it's an interesting story, and you should read everything about it. I will have links below in the description. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that. You'll need it.